I once watched a 7-year-old boy handle a situation that a grown adult in front of me completely fell apart over, and that image has never left me. It was a busy Saturday morning at a local market, the kind of place where the noise hits you before you even get through the door. Vendors calling out, carts rattling across uneven floors, the sharp smell of fresh bread mixing with coffee, and something faintly sweet from a nearby stall. I was there picking up a few things, half awake, moving slow. And then I saw him. A kid, maybe 7, standing at a fruit stall with a small cloth bag over his shoulder. He was counting coins in his palm, lips moving slightly, completely focused. The vendor said something to him. The boy nodded, handed over the exact amount, took his change, dropped it carefully into his pocket, and walked away. No hesitation. No looking around for someone to check with. No pulling out a phone. He just moved through that crowded market like he belonged there. Like the world was a place he already knew how to handle. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Because right in front of me, maybe 3 steps away, a young guy, I would guess somewhere around 19 or 20, was staring at the same vendor with his card in his hand, visibly frozen, quietly asking his friend what he was supposed to do. The friend leaned over, pointed at the machine. The guy nodded like he had just been shown how to defuse something complicated. He tapped his card, got his change, and looked genuinely relieved. 2 people, same stall, completely different inner experience of the exact same moment. I kept thinking about that on the drive home, not in a judgmental way. More like something had shifted slightly in how I was seeing things. Because that young guy at the stall was not a bad person. He was not lazy or careless. He had simply never been allowed to feel uncomfortable long enough to figure things out. Someone had always been one step ahead of him, solving things before they became problems, answering before he had to ask, carrying the bag before he even reached for it. And the boy at the fruit stall, he had clearly been handed a different kind of life. Not easier, actually harder in a lot of ways, but one where the small difficulties were left to him. Where the coins were his to count and the decision was his to make. And somewhere inside that ordinary, quiet, completely unremarkable Saturday morning errand, something in him had been built that no classroom and no amount of kind words could ever produce. That is the thing I want to talk about today. Because what separates those 2 people is not intelligence. It is not personality. It is not even opportunity in the traditional sense. It is something much more specific. Something that starts forming very early. And something that parents either protect or quietly chip away at, usually without ever realizing they are doing it. If this kind of conversation matters to you, if you are a parent or you work with kids, or you just think seriously about why some people move through life with a kind of quiet ease, while others seem to be constantly waiting for permission, then stay with me. Because what comes next is going to challenge something most of us were taught to believe is kindness. And friends, if this already has you thinking, please subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps this reach people who need it. Now, before I get into what actually builds that kind of inner confidence, I need to take you back to a moment I witnessed in my own home, because this is where the second half of that market story starts to make painful sense. My neighbor Sarah has a son named Oliver. He is 8 now, but this was about a year ago. I was over for coffee one afternoon, and Oliver was at the kitchen table trying to assemble something. A small wooden kit he had gotten as a gift. The kind with tiny pieces that slot together if you read the instructions carefully and have the patience to go slowly. He had been at it for a while. You could tell by the look on his face. Jaw tight, shoulders up near his ears. A few pieces scattered in a way that suggested at least one failed attempt already. Sarah saw him from across the room, and I watched something happen in her body before a single word was spoken. Her weight shifted forward. Her hands came up slightly, like a goalkeeper reading a penalty kick. Every muscle in her was already moving toward him before she had made any conscious decision to help. And I got it. I completely understood it. Because watching your child struggle feels like watching someone you love stand in the rain while you are holding an umbrella. Every instinct says move, says close the distance, says fix it now. She crossed the kitchen in about 4 steps and said, "Here, let me just show you the tricky bit." Oliver leaned back, let her hands take over, and within about 30 seconds, the piece clicked into place. Sarah smiled. Oliver looked at the assembled part for a moment, then quietly pushed his chair back and went to find something else to do. He did not finish the kit. And I do not think it was because he lost interest. I think it was because the moment her hands touched those pieces, the project stopped being his. And something he could not quite name, some small but real source of energy, just went out. The praise is making your child weaker. And I know that sounds like exactly the wrong thing to say, but stay with me for a second, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. After that afternoon at Sarah's kitchen table, I started paying attention differently. Not just to Oliver, but to kids everywhere. At the park, at school pickup, in waiting rooms. And I noticed something that genuinely unsettled me. The kids who were praised the most, constantly, loudly, for everything, were also the ones who checked their parents' faces the most. They would finish a drawing and immediately look up, not at the drawing, at the adult. Like the drawing itself meant nothing until someone else confirmed it was good. Like they had learned, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that the value of a thing lives in someone else's reaction to it, not in the thing itself. I remember watching a girl at a playground, maybe 6 years old. She had climbed to the top of a small wooden structure on her own. It took her a couple of tries, and her hands were gripping hard, and her little sneakers kept slipping slightly on the wood. But she got there, and the second she reached the top, she turned around. Not to look at the view, not to feel the height. She turned around to find her dad. And the dad, to his credit, was watching, and he said something warm and enthusiastic. The girl smiled, and then immediately climbed back down. She did not stand there and feel it. She got her reaction, and she left. Like she had completed a transaction. That image stuck with me. Because I started wondering what would have happened if the dad had just smiled quietly, or said nothing at all. Would she have stood up there a little longer? Would she have felt something just for herself? Something that did not require his voice to exist? The uncomfortable truth about praise is that it is addictive. Not for the parent, for the child. Every time we say amazing or brilliant or you are so clever, we are giving the child a small hit of something that feels good but does not last. And the next time they do something, they are not doing it to experience it. They are doing it to get that feeling again from us. We become the source, and they become dependent on the source without either of us realizing it is happening. I talked about this once with a friend of mine, a teacher named Daniel, who has spent years working with kids across different age groups. And he said something I have thought about almost every week since. He said, "The kids who struggle most when they get to me are not the ones who were ignored at home. They are the ones who were applauded for everything, because they have no internal reference point. They genuinely do not know if something they did was good unless someone tells them. They outsourced that judgment so early and so completely that they do not have it anymore. That is not a small problem. That is a structural one. You cannot patch it with more encouragement. More encouragement is what built it. And here is where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because most parents who do this, Sarah included, me included at times, are not doing it from carelessness. They are doing it from love, from a genuine desire to make their child feel seen and valued. The instinct behind it is completely understandable, but the effect is the opposite of what we intend. We think we are filling something up. We are actually making the container leak faster. So if praise is not the answer, and stepping in is not the answer, then what is? And this is the part where I had to genuinely sit with something that felt almost counterintuitive the first time I encountered it. Because the answer is not a technique. It is not a script. It is not a new phrase to say instead of good job. It is a question. One single question that changes the entire frame of how you see your role as a parent. And once you swap out the old question for this one, everything else shifts with it. The old question is, how do I make my child feel confident? And it sounds completely reasonable. It sounds like good parenting. But that question, that exact phrasing, already contains the trap. Because the word make puts you at the center. It means confidence is a thing you produce and deliver. Like you are a factory and your child is the customer waiting at the door. The new question is this: how do I get out of the way long enough for my child to feel it themselves? Read that again slowly, because the difference between those two questions is the difference between handing someone a fish every morning and never once letting them near the water. The moment I genuinely absorbed that shift, something changed in how I watched parents interact with their kids. I stopped seeing hovering as love. I started seeing it as something else. Something quieter and more complicated. A kind of fear. The parent's own fear dressed up as protection. And that realization opened up something much darker and much more honest about why we do what we do, which is exactly where this story goes next. There is a moment every parent fears more than almost anything. And it is not the big dramatic crisis. It is the small, quiet one. The one where you realize that your love, your very specific, very devoted, very hands-on love, might be the thing doing the damage. That realization hit me, not through reading or research. It hit me through watching Sarah again. About 2 months after the wooden kit incident, we were at a small gathering at her place. A few families, kids running around. The kind of Sunday afternoon that smells like coffee and someone's jacket left near the heater. Oliver was in the garden with 2 other kids. They were trying to build something with sticks and rope. Some kind of structure with no clear purpose. The way kids do when no adult has handed them a plan. One of the other kids, a girl named Mia, was directing things with total confidence, picking up sticks, discarding some, tying knots that did not hold, and then trying differently without any frustration on her face. Just adjustment, just try again. Oliver was standing slightly to the side, hands in his pockets, watching. And at one point, Mia handed him a piece of rope and said something like, "Here. You do this part." And Oliver looked toward the kitchen window, where Sarah was visible through the glass, like he was checking whether it was okay to try. He was 8 years old, checking whether it was okay to try? I did not say anything to Sarah that day. It was not my place, and I knew it. But I kept thinking about that window, about how it had become a kind of invisible leash. Not because Sarah was controlling, she was one of the warmest people I knew, but because she had spent years being so consistently available, so reliably present and ready to help, that Oliver had stopped trusting his own judgment. He had outsourced it, fully, to her. And that is the thing about hovering. It does not announce itself as damage. It announces itself as love. It feels like protection from the outside, and it feels like safety from the inside, right up until the moment the child needs to function without you. And then you see what was quietly being built underneath all that warmth. A kid who cannot pick up a rope without looking for permission. The first shift, the first real practice that actually changes this, starts smaller than you would expect. It starts with physical stillness. With the parent learning to feel the pull toward intervention and choosing not to follow it, just for a moment, just long enough for something else to happen. What that something else is the whole point. And I want to describe it as specifically as I can, because the theory is easy to agree with. It is the physical reality of it that most people are not prepared for. Imagine you are standing in a kitchen, and your child is trying to open a jar of something. They are maybe 7, 8. Their hands are not quite strong enough yet, and the lid is not moving, and their face is getting tight with effort. Every cell in your body says, "Step in." Your hand is already moving. And what I am asking you to imagine is stopping that hand. Not permanently, just for 10 seconds. Just to find out what happens in the space you create. I tried this myself, not with my own child, I do not have kids, but with my nephew Jake. He was visiting and he was trying to zip up a small backpack that had something awkward sticking out of it. The kind of thing that takes a specific angle to solve. He was 7 at the time, and he had been fighting it for maybe 20 seconds before I noticed. And I felt the exact pull I described. The move toward him. The fix-it reflex. And I stopped. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. I watched his jaw tighten. 4, 5. He shifted his grip. 6, 7. He pushed the awkward item down with his palm. 8, 9. The zip moved. 10. It closed. He did not look at me. He just picked up the bag and slung it over his shoulder and walked to the door. And something in his walk was different. It was subtle, but it was real. There was a fraction more weight in his step. Not arrogance, just presence. Like something had quietly clicked into place inside him, along with that zip. I stood in that hallway, feeling something I had not expected. Not pride in him. Something more personal than that. Something like regret. Because I started counting how many times I had not waited. How many zips and lids and knots I had taken from him without ever realizing I was taking anything at all. And that was just 10 seconds. 10 counted seconds of doing nothing. Which raises a question that is going to feel very uncomfortable when you really sit with it. If 10 seconds can do that, what has every skipped 10 seconds been costing your child all along? The most damaging thing a parent can do has nothing to do with anger or neglect. It is something far more ordinary and far more invisible. It is doing too much for too long with too much love. After the backpack moment with Jake, I started paying attention to a different layer of the same problem. Because staying still during a struggle, counting to 10, not grabbing the zip, that was one piece. But there was something underneath it that I had not fully looked at yet. Something about how children understand their own place in the world. Whether they feel like passengers in their own life or like someone whose hands actually matter. I have a friend named David. He has a daughter called Lily. She is 9 now, and David is one of the most genuinely caring parents I have ever been around. The kind who remembers every detail, who plans ahead, who makes sure everything is handled before Lily even notices it needs handling. Her bag is packed, her lunch is sorted, her schedule is managed. Her conflicts at school are quietly smoothed over with a word to the right teacher. David runs a quiet operation of care around Lily that is so seamless she has never had to feel the friction of real life. Not once. I was with them one afternoon when Lily's friend called and asked if Lily could bring something to a group project they were working on together. Something small, a pair of scissors and some colored card. Lily came to David and relayed the message. And before she had finished the sentence, David was already moving, already opening a drawer, already selecting the right scissors, already finding the card and checking the colors. Lily stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him prepare the thing she had been asked to bring. And when he handed it to her, she took it and walked away. No particular expression on her face, just acceptance, like this was simply how things worked. And I sat there thinking about what had just happened in that ordinary Tuesday afternoon moment. Lily had been given a task by her peer, something small and real and hers to handle. And it had been taken from her in under 40 seconds. Not cruelly, not deliberately, just efficiently, just lovingly. And Lily had not even registered it as a loss. Because she never felt ownership of the task in the first place. That is the thing that started to genuinely worry me. Not that David was a bad father. He was exceptional in almost every way. But that Lily had learned, at 9 years old, that when something needed doing, someone else did it. And that lesson, absorbed quietly over years of packed bags and sorted lunches and smoothed-over problems, was building something inside her that had nothing to do with ease or comfort. It was building a very specific kind of uncertainty. The kind that comes not from being hurt, but from never being trusted. Because here is what children actually need. And this is the part that took me a long time to understand properly. They do not need a frictionless life. They need to feel like their hands are in it. They need to feel that something real, something the people around them actually depend on, exists because of what they did, not because of what you did for them. There is a difference between a child who is cared for and a child who feels capable. And for a long time, I think we have been so focused on the first one that we have quietly forgotten about the second. Caring for a child is easy to measure. You can see it. You can point to it. You can feel good about it. Capability is harder. It lives in moments you have to resist filling. In tasks you have to resist completing. In problems you have to resist solving before they even fully form. And the practice that builds it is not complicated. It does not require a system or a schedule or a special conversation. It requires one specific decision. This week, not this month, not when things calm down. This week. You pick one real thing in your home that your child is capable of handling, and you hand it to them completely. Not as an experiment, not as a lesson, as a genuine transfer of ownership. Something the household actually needs done. Something with real weight to it. It could be anything. Taking the recycling out every evening. Being in charge of refilling whatever runs low in the kitchen. Handling a specific part of the morning routine entirely on their own. The task itself is almost not the point. The point is the transfer. The moment where you look at them and say, "This is yours now. I need you to handle it." And then you actually let them. What happens next is the part most parents are not prepared for, and it connects directly to how you respond when they do it. Because the response, or more precisely, the absence of a certain kind of response, is where everything either holds together or quietly falls apart. Most parents will never know they broke something in their child, because the child will never say a word about it. They will just quietly stop trying. That thought stayed with me long after the afternoon at David's place, and it led me to the third practice, the one that is hardest to explain because it looks the most like doing nothing, but is actually the most precise and deliberate thing on this entire list. I want to tell you about a specific evening I spent at my friend Rachel's house. Rachel has a son named Max. He is 6. And that evening, Max had settled himself on the living room floor with a cardboard box, some tape, a marker, and a collection of small objects he had gathered from around the house. A bottle cap, a smooth stone, a broken pen, a piece of string. He was not following any instructions. There was no kit, no plan, no goal anyone had set for him. He was just completely, utterly somewhere else. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were moving slowly between the objects. His hands were arranging and rearranging with a kind of quiet deliberateness that I have rarely seen in adults doing anything. Rachel came into the room to refill her coffee and stopped when she saw him. And I watched her face do something interesting. First, there was warmth. Then, there was the pull. The familiar gravitational force toward engagement, toward connection, toward saying something. She opened her mouth, and then she looked at me. And something in my expression must have registered, because she closed it again. She poured her coffee, and she left the room. We sat in the kitchen for about 20 minutes, talking quietly, and Max did not call for us once. He did not need an audience. He was not performing. He was building something entirely internal, using the external objects as tools for a process that was happening completely inside his own mind. And that process, that private, unobserved, uncommented on process, is one of the rarest things a child gets to experience anymore. Because we live in a world that is deeply uncomfortable with a child being unreachable, we want to know what they are making. We want to name it. We want to photograph it and share it and reflect it back to them with enthusiasm. And every single time we do that, we pull them out of the only place where genuine self-trust actually grows. The place where they are alone with their own attention, and their own judgment, and their own quiet satisfaction, with no external signal telling them whether it is good or not. Rachel told me later that she used to interrupt Max constantly during those moments, not from impatience, from love, from wanting to be part of whatever he was experiencing. She would say, "Oh, what are you making?" Or, "That looks so cool." And Max would look up, answer briefly, and then the energy would be gone. He would drift toward the television or ask for something to eat, the spell broken so completely that going back felt impossible. She had started holding back about 3 weeks before that evening, just staying out of the room, just letting the silence exist. And she said the difference in how long he stayed absorbed in things was immediate. What used to last 5 minutes was now lasting 30, 40, once almost an entire hour. And she noticed something else. When he did eventually come to find her, he came differently. Not restless, not looking for input. He came with a kind of settled energy, like someone who had just finished something real, even if no one else could name what it was. That is the third practice, and it is the simplest to describe and the hardest to actually do. When your child is deeply absorbed in something, leave them alone. Completely. Do not comment, do not photograph, do not walk through the room and glance over their shoulder. Find something else to do, in another space, and let them be alone with themselves for as long as it lasts. Because what they are doing in that state is not playing. They are learning how to be inside their own mind without needing it validated. They are building the single most important internal muscle a person can have. The ability to find something meaningful without anyone else telling them it is. And every time you interrupt that, even gently, even warmly, you are pulling the thread out of something that was just beginning to hold together. The question is not whether your child needs you. They do, completely. The question is whether they also know how to need themselves. And that second thing, that quieter and more essential thing, only grows in the spaces you are brave enough to leave empty. Now, I want to bring everything together, because these 3 practices, staying still during the struggle, handing over something real, protecting the silence, they are not 3 separate ideas. They are 3 angles on exactly the same truth. And that truth is something I think most of us already know somewhere deep down, but have been too uncomfortable to fully look at. We have built a version of parenting that is centered almost entirely on the parent, on what we provide, what we fix, what we say, what we feel when our child succeeds. And in doing that, without meaning to, we have slowly moved the child out of their own story. They became the audience. We became the ones doing the work. And then we wonder why, 10 or 15 years later, they seem somehow distant from their own lives, not quite sure what they want, not quite able to push through difficulty, not quite able to sit with themselves without reaching for something external to fill the quiet. The boy at the market that started all of this, the one counting his coins with total calm. He was not confident because someone told him he was great. He was confident because the adults in his life had consistently, deliberately chosen to be less present than they wanted to be. They had held back when holding back was hard. They had handed things over when doing it themselves would have been faster. They had stayed quiet when speaking would have felt like love. And all of that restraint, all of that invisible, unglamorous, daily restraint had built something in him that no amount of praise could have manufactured. Real strength in a child is not something you can give them on a good day. It is something that accumulates in all the moments you chose not to take over. It is slow and it is quiet, and it looks from the outside like nothing is happening, but it is everything. So I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to actually think about this before you move on. Think about the last time your child was struggling with something, and ask yourself honestly, did you wait or did you move? And if you moved, was it for them? Or was it because their discomfort was making you uncomfortable? That answer, the honest one, is where everything starts. If this made you think differently about even one moment with a child in your life, share it with someone who needs it. And if you want more conversations like this one, subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps this reach the people who are ready to hear it.